At 19, I learned that sometimes the people who tell you that you will never become anything are the same people who are most afraid of what you might become. My name is Ethan, and the night my parents threw me out, I had $17 in my wallet, an old backpack, and nowhere to go. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just finished my shift at a small neighborhood restaurant. My shirt smelled like fried onions, garlic, and smoke. My hands were sore from carrying boxes, and my shoes were soaked from walking home through the rain. I opened the front door expecting the usual silence. Instead, I saw both my parents sitting at the kitchen table. My father had his arms crossed. My mother wouldn't look at me. I stopped in the doorway. "What happened?" "Sit down," my father said. Something in his voice made me nervous. I sat. He pushed a piece of paper across the table. "What is this?" I looked at it. It was my community college enrollment form. I got accepted into the culinary program. My father stared at me. Then he laughed. Not a happy laugh. A cold, dismissive laugh. "You're not going." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me." My mother finally looked at me. "Your father thinks it's time you started acting like an adult." "I am acting like an adult." "You work in a restaurant," my father snapped. "I have a job." "You wash dishes and carry boxes." "I've been promoted to kitchen assistant." "That isn't a career." "It could be." My father shook his head. "You're 19. You don't know what you're doing." I looked at my mother. "Do you agree with him?" She hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than the words. "I think you should consider something more stable," she said. "Like what?" My father answered immediately. "Office work." He had already arranged an interview with a friend who owned an insurance company. "You'll start Monday." I stared at him. "I don't want that job." "You don't get to decide." "I do, actually." My father leaned back. "You think because you're 19 you're independent?" "I want to become a chef." "You want to play with food." "That's not what it is. You're throwing away your future." "No," I said quietly. "I'm trying to build one." My father's face hardened. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then he stood. "Pack your things." I thought I had misheard him. "What? You want to be independent?" He pointed toward the hallway. "Then be independent." My mother immediately stood. "Please, you're both upset." My father ignored her. "Pack your things." I looked at my mother. "Mom." She looked away. That was the moment I realized this wasn't an argument. They were serious. I went upstairs. My bedroom suddenly looked unfamiliar. The posters on the wall. The books on my desk. The old baseball glove my father had bought me when I was 12. Everything I owned suddenly had to fit into one backpack. I stood in the middle of the room, frozen. I didn't know what to take. I grabbed clothes first. Then my wallet. Then the small notebook where I had written recipes since I was 15. Finally, I took a photograph of my grandmother. She had been the person who taught me to cook. Before she died, she told me something I had never forgotten. People remember how you make them feel. I put the photograph inside my backpack. Then I walked downstairs. My father was waiting near the front door. He looked at the backpack. "That's all." "Yes." My mother was crying now. She walked toward me. "I'll call you." My father shook his head. "No." She looked at him. "Don't." He turned to me. "If you walk out that door, don't come back asking us for help." I swallowed. "I won't. You'll be begging on the street within a month." I stared at him. "I hope you're wrong." He opened the door. "Go." I stepped outside. The rain was coming down harder now. The door closed behind me. I stood on the porch for several seconds. I waited. Some part of me expected my mother to open the door. She didn't. So I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I had $17. My phone had a cracked screen. My car was an old vehicle that barely ran, and I had less than a quarter tank of gas. I drove to the restaurant. It was almost midnight. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, was still inside counting the day's receipts. He looked up when I walked in. "Ethan." I tried to smile. "Can I stay here tonight?" He studied my face. "What happened?" "My parents kicked me out." He didn't ask for details. He simply locked the front door. "Come with me." He led me into a small storage room behind the kitchen. There was an old couch, a blanket, a broken fan. "You can sleep here." I stared at him. "Really? You work hard." He shrugged. "That's enough for me." I sat down. For the first time since leaving home, I let myself cry. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I had barely slept. My back hurt. My neck hurt. But I got up. Mr. Alvarez found me sweeping the kitchen. "You don't have to work this early. I need the hours." He looked at me. "Your father still thinks this isn't a real career?" I nodded. Mr. Alvarez smiled. "Then prove him wrong." That sentence stayed with me. I worked every shift they gave me. I washed dishes. I chopped vegetables. I cleaned grease from ovens. I unloaded deliveries. And whenever the chef had 5 minutes, I watched. I watched how he seasoned meat, how he tested sauces, how he arranged plates, how he managed a kitchen when 3 orders came in at once. I filled my notebook with everything. At night, I practiced. I bought cheap ingredients and experimented in the restaurant kitchen after closing. Sometimes the food was terrible. Sometimes it was almost good. Once, I made a sauce so salty that Mr. Alvarez took one bite and immediately reached for water. He laughed. "You're learning." I ruined it. "No." He shook his head. "You learn what too much salt tastes like." 6 months passed. I saved every dollar. I slept in the storage room. I ate employee meals. I stopped buying anything I didn't absolutely need. Then one evening, I saw a handwritten sign taped to the window of a tiny restaurant 3 blocks away. For sale. I walked inside. The place was empty. The kitchen was filthy. The refrigerator made a terrible noise. Half the chairs were broken. The previous owner had failed. Everyone who knew the neighborhood told me the place was finished. But I saw something else. A kitchen. A dining room. A chance. I asked the owner how much he wanted. The price was almost everything I had saved. Mr. Alvarez warned me. "Ethan, don't do something just because you want to prove your father wrong." "I don't." "Then why?" I looked at the restaurant. "Because I think I can make people want to come here." He studied me. Then he smiled. "That's different." I signed the papers. On opening day, 12 people came. 12. I stood behind the counter that night, staring at the nearly empty dining room. I had spent almost everything I owned. My parents still weren't speaking to me. The restaurant was losing money. And for the first time, I wondered whether my father had been right. Then an elderly woman who had eaten my grandmother's chicken stew walked back to the counter. She smiled. "Who made this?" "I did." She nodded. "Tell him it reminded me of home." Then she left. I stood there holding the empty bowl. That was the moment I understood. I didn't need everyone to believe in me. I only needed one person to taste what I made and feel something. The next morning, I opened the restaurant again. And I refused to quit. The next morning, I opened the restaurant again. And I refused to quit. For the first 3 months, I worked almost 20 hours a day. I arrived before sunrise and left long after midnight. I cooked. I cleaned. I answered the phone. I washed dishes when my dishwasher didn't show up. I fixed leaking pipes with instructions from videos online. I even painted the dining room myself. Sometimes, I would stand outside the restaurant after closing and count the day's money. There were nights when the numbers barely covered the electricity bill. There were mornings when I wondered whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But every time doubt became too loud, I remembered my father's words. "You'll be begging on the street." At first, those words hurt. Eventually, they became fuel. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. Then, on a rainy Thursday, a food blogger named Sarah walked into my restaurant. She ordered the chicken stew. She didn't say much while eating. When she finished, she asked for the chef. I thought something was wrong. Instead, she shook my hand. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother." She smiled. "Tell her she's brilliant." "She passed away." Sarah's expression softened. "Then tell her anyway." The next morning, she published a review. She wrote about the food. She wrote about the tiny restaurant. She wrote about the 19-year-old owner who had risked everything to build it. By lunchtime, there was a line outside. I thought it was a mistake. Then the line was still there that evening. The next day, it wrapped around the corner. I couldn't believe it. People were waiting 40 minutes for a table. Some waited an hour. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Customers asked for reservations. Local newspapers called. A television station wanted an interview. For the first time, the restaurant was making real money. I hired 2 employees. Then 4. Then 8. I moved out of the storage room. I rented a tiny apartment. I bought a mattress that wasn't broken. And for the first time in nearly a year, I woke up in a bed that belonged to me. But success brought new problems. The restaurant became so popular that I couldn't keep up. Customers complained about waiting. Employees became exhausted. Suppliers raised their prices. One night, the refrigerator broke. The next week, the oven stopped working. Then the city inspector found a plumbing issue. I spent almost everything fixing it. There were days when I wanted to give up. But I had learned something. A dream doesn't become easier when it starts working. It becomes bigger. And bigger dreams require bigger problems. So I kept learning. I took business courses at night. I studied accounting. I learned about payroll. I learned about supply chains. I learned that owning a restaurant wasn't just about cooking. It was about people, the employees, the customers, the suppliers. Everyone mattered. 3 years after I opened that tiny restaurant, I opened my second location, then my third, then my fourth. Each time, I refused to expand too quickly. I remembered what failure felt like. I wanted every restaurant to feel like the first one. Warm, simple, personal. 5 years after my parents threw me out, I owned 3 restaurants. I also started a small scholarship for young people who wanted to study culinary arts but couldn't afford tuition. The first scholarship recipient was a 19-year-old girl named Maya. She reminded me of myself. She had talent. She had determination. And she had parents who didn't believe cooking could become a career. I paid her tuition. When she thanked me, I told her, "Don't prove them wrong." She looked confused. I smiled. "Prove yourself right." 10 years after that rainy night, I owned 9 restaurants. My company employed more than 200 people. I had a bakery, a catering business, a training kitchen, and a scholarship program. I had also learned something unexpected. My father was right about one thing. I had no idea what I was doing at 19, but I didn't need to. I just needed to keep learning. Then, one afternoon, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. I stared at her name on my screen for nearly a minute. Finally, I picked up. "Hello." There was silence. Then her voice. "Ethan." "Hi, Mom." She began crying. "We saw your interview." "Oh, you own 7 restaurants now?" "9. Silence. 9. "Yes." She laughed through her tears. "Your father doesn't know what to say." I looked out the window. "What does he say?" "He says he's proud of you." I didn't respond. "Ethan, I'm here. Can we see you?" I thought about it. Yes. We met at my newest restaurant. My mother looked around the dining room with tears in her eyes. My father walked slowly beside her. He looked older.